The NBA draft has come to a close after day 2, and after much deliberation, I had to decide where I wanted to place the Utah Jazz specifically in their overall draft successes and failures from this year. Now, there is a bulk of stuff that we can go through, whether it be alleged statements from the front office, statements from other people, news outlets, whatever the case may be. But for myself personally, I loved this draft for the Utah Jazz. There were a lot of holes that ended up getting filled, and there were also a lot of interesting storylines to go along with them. I'm willing to coin this draft for the Utah Jazz as the most stolen draft class of all time, because there was steals galore. But first, go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications if you're into the Utah Jazz or if you like basketball in general, and I'll give you guys the most comprehensive breakdown of what happened and why I'm so fond of these players in this video. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this one. First off the board went Cody Williams. Now, he does happen to be the younger brother of the one and only Jalen Williams, who currently plays for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And while he doesn't have the same sturdiness and frame, he makes up for it with his immaculate length and his ability to be extremely successful on the defensive side of the ball, while also being able to surprisingly shoot decently enough from three, though it was on a really low volume. The Jazz did make an attempt to trade up to 5, but there wasn't anything too crazy that was materializing, and when Stephon Castle ended up getting pulled by the San Antonio Spurs, things kind of entirely evaporated, because that would have been the player that they would have preferred to get if they ended up trading up into that position. Being that the top 10 ended up going the way that it was, and a lot of players jumped higher and a lot of players just didn't end up making the cut, there were a lot of people that were available at the 10 spot that the Jazz had really strong interest in. And the person that ended up winning out was obviously Cody Williams. Now, I'm very fond of his game. I believe that his ability to fill the hole that is necessary for the Utah Jazz right now at wing depth is going to be something that cannot be overstated. I believe that his overall defensive capabilities and his switchability similar to a Jaden McDaniels, because he does only weigh around 190 pounds himself while standing at 6'8" and having a 7 freaking 1 wingspan, is going to be something that we're going to have to keep an eye on, and I love that. Offensively, he's a pretty strong slasher. He does find a way to be crafty once he gets into the crevices at the rim. I think that his shooting touch might need a little bit of touching up from beyond the arc, because yes, he did shoot 41.5% from 3, but overall it was on a really low shot volume considering the fact that he had the ball in his hands as much as he did with the Colorado Buffaloes. Moving on to Isaiah Collier. Before this NCAA season that just passed us by was played, he was slated to be the #1 pick in his draft class. Now, the reason why he fell was in part because of his hand injury that he sustained during the season, which made him take a time off of basketball, but also, and more importantly, his turnover proneness and his lack of shooting touch. Now, he is known for being an athletic freak that is able to finish at the rim, but he only tested as having a 34-inch vertical, and instead of being 6'5" and 210 pounds, he was actually listed as 6'2.5" and 204 pounds. Still a sturdy frame, but a stark difference in height. And not to mention, his wingspan was listed as 6'4" and 3/4, which is lower than the previous listed height that they had him at, which does show a little bit of concern if you are teams that were looking in on him. All that ends up getting pushed down even further when you take into account the simple fact that he was really turnover prone, his shooting numbers were not that high, and while he did manage to shoot 33% from 3 on 3 attempts per game, he also only managed to shoot 67% from the free throw line on basically 6 attempts per game, which is a little bit concerning, but overall he was a pretty solid playmaker. He did see the floor well, and as the season progressed, and particularly when he came back from injury, he really upped his averages from the standpoint of being turnover prone. He made better reads, he made more solid passes, and he just wasn't the same risky point guard, essentially, that was on the court for the Trojans. Now, admittedly, with Southern California, they just weren't honestly a very good basketball team all in all, so there is a little bit of issue with his lack of success in the college realm as far as winning pedigree goes. At the same time, though, I believe that he will have the ability to understand a system and be put in situations to where his turnovers will be a thing of the past. And while he might still have his woes here and there, I don't think he's going to be singing to the tune of 3 turnovers per game as he was in college. I just don't see that being a very likely situation, especially considering how the Jazz ended up dealing with Keontae George as the season progressed. Last year, when they tried to transition him into being a point guard, remember, Isaiah Collier is already a point guard, so he'll be playing his natural position. But for myself personally, I think the way he looked in college, he does have a sneaky ability that could allow him to be a starting caliber point guard. But overall, I think he's more of a 6-man kind of guy just because his height was not what it was all talked up to be. And though he is athletic, that athleticism that he has at just a 34-inch vertical and only having a wingspan of almost 6'5", it's not necessarily enough to put him over the edge and give him immediate physical tools over anybody else. At the same time, people are very fond of his jumper once he enters a 3-point line. Outside the arc, he looks a little bit stiff. Once he enters a 3-point line and he goes to that midi game, he starts cooking and that thing is smooth. So I'm very confident in his ability to be successful. He just needs a little bit of time to grow into his most ideal form with the Utah Jazz roster. Moving on lastly to the one and only Kyle Filipowski, who was picked at 32nd overall because of what appears to be off the court issues, allegedly with his girlfriend, that were so insane that it made NBA executives say, you know what, you're a good athlete, you have a good body of work, but we just don't want to deal with those problems right now after what we've been seeing from some other players going on in the past, even when those teams were prepared to allegedly deal with them. So with all that being said, this is a player that was supposed to be picked in the lottery. The man averaged basically 16, 9, and 3 as a center while also putting up a block and a half, averaging over a steal, shooting 50% from the field, and shooting 34, almost 35% from 3-point range on 3 attempts per game. The dude's a baller. And obviously, yes, he played at Duke, the blue blood school, so they're known for producing guys, and he's always been a pretty solid basketball player. He has been known to have slow feet, though, which limits the ability of where you want to see him on the floor because his switchability then becomes a little bit of a head scratcher at times. But I do like how his skill set is kind of counter to Walker Kessler. Walker Kessler is obviously the better defensive presence overall. He sizes his feet a little bit better from what I've seen on tape. He's obviously the stronger rim protector, but overall, offensively, it's night and day because one is more so a lob threat or a light finisher at the rim who kind of has his inconsistencies where he's really strong some games and in other games he just misses bunnies. For Filipowski, he can shoot that thing, light that thing up. Pick and rolls are going to be a nightmare with him on the floor as long as he can mature properly. And he already has an NBA ready build at 6'11" and almost 250 pounds. So as long as his conditioning is up to par, I think that he could be the person that we get the most out of in the immediate future, even though he'll likely be a role player. Cody Williams will have the opportunity to present himself as the ideal wing for this team going forward. So long as he stands to be what he has been and puts on a little bit more weight, I think his defense is going to be the thing that helps push him over the edge. Remember, the Jazz ended up ranking 30th after a stretch of games where they looked really good defensively, where they looked really good offensively, and they cleared 500, and then they just went at the trade deadline and sent away pieces because they couldn't get anybody to come in. And so they just bottomed out, and that's how we found ourselves in this particular position. And through that trade, we ended up having the opportunity to get Isaiah Collier and Kyle Filipowski. And honestly, I love it because, like I said, Kyle Filipowski was supposed to be a lottery pick. His numbers show that he's a lottery pick. Off the court issues aside, he's a lottery pick. Looking at Isaiah Collier, he was supposed to be the #1 player in this draft class. But because of things that happened when he was in college, along with his injury, that's why he didn't end up. So arguably, he's a lottery pick in my eyes as well. And then Cody Williams, we felt might not even be available at 10, and he was available at 10. So you got 3 lottery pick caliber players, one of them being a top 10. Arguably, you could say maybe all 3 of them, depending on what a team needs, could have been a top 10 pick in this particular draft. And you got them for a 10th, a 29th, and a 32nd. That's a steal. That's a hot sale. That's a bargain. That's Amazon fire sale. You can't compete with that. That's a going out of business sale like you've never seen before. This is amazing if you are a Utah Jazz fan. And while I did rank them as having a B, maybe a B plus after day 1, with Filipowski having gone over, considering the baggage that comes along with him from the off the court issues, that kind of hampers things a little bit just because you have to deal with that firestorm. But once it's out of the way, it's out of the way. Remember, this is basketball. This is not pop culture, social media club. We're not sitting here dancing, you know. This isn't for fun. This is a business at the end of the day. So once that gets tabled, you look at him as a player. And I'm already looking at him as a player. And I never forgot what he was when he was at Duke. And I know that he can do similar things at the NBA level. Because of that, I have full confidence that this is effectively the best draft class for the Utah Jazz by comparison to the rest of the teams in the NBA. And I've mulled over the numbers a little bit more. And obviously you have some teams like picking a talent like in Alex Sara, who's supposed to be terrific from day one, but didn't want to go to the Atlanta Hawks so much so that he refused vehemently to go to a workout. I think that obviously that's something that's going to be able to contend with it, because if he ends up being a perennial all-star, he ends up being a franchise centerpiece. Right now, obviously he went to the Wizards, so we don't know how likely that's going to be, but for the fact that he's supposed to be slated as high as he is, that single-handedly is obviously capable of contending with probably one guaranteed starter in Cody Williams, and then two role player type potential starter players in Isaiah Collier and Kyle Filipowski. But who's to say? I think that the gates are wide open on that, and the jury has yet to make a decision. Obviously, these next coming seasons are going to be the thing that ends up determining how things go. And it seems like with the Jazz hoping to have their eyes on this next year's draft class where Cooper Flag is going to be available, they think that they have the opportunity to get it done. Now the question becomes, do they keep Lauri Markkanen, or can they convince him to stay during this whole tankathon that's effectively going to come this season? Or do they find a trade partner that's going to give the 4+ draft picks that were required for the Mikal Bridges trade? Because a lot of executives are feeling as though those two players are in the same stratosphere of basketball relevancy and have the same level of allegedly contributions that they can make to a championship caliber team. But I leave that up to the people and to the future to tell us. So let me know in the comments below what you guys think. How do you grade this draft overall? Myself personally, I'm going to be willing to bump it up to a B+. I might have to go A-. This is just because of recency bias and because of all the tape that I ended up pouring over. I really like what we saw, more so for the value we got it for than just the players themselves. Remember, I said we bagged one starter and probably two strong rotation players at worst, with effectively a lottery pick and then 2 early second rounders essentially. I think that that's glorious value for those 3 particular guys. Had they been just 2 other guys in the back stretch and you had Cody Martin, but the other 2 guys were supposed to be picked late in the first round or really early in the second round, late in the second round, then it would be like, okay, you know, it's a reasonable draft, you know, B-. They did what they were supposed to do, nothing too crazy. But to me, looking back on it now, this is really, really darn good, because unless all 3 of these guys somehow fizzle out and they're just completely hot dog water at the NBA level, which I don't think is likely at all, you really made off with a lot of talent without having to move up, move back, or anything at all. And while I'm not the highest on the whole tanking situation or trying to figure out what exactly is going on in Danny Ainge and the Justin Zanuck in that front office's head, I'm willing to ride it out for a couple of years to just see if they can capitalize on opportunities like this that fall into their laps and make the most of it. With that being said, go ahead and comment your thoughts down below like I requested before. I'm always interested to hear what you guys have to say, and I'll try to respond to as many as possible. Subscribe, turn on post notifications, and like the video if you enjoy the content. As always, it's your boy Wraith Hoops, and as always, good morning, good evening, and good night, no matter where you're on the globe watching. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.